at cspan.org. The House is about to meet. Members will consider 3 bills, 2 dealing with veterans issues, and another allowing people who shouldn't be buried in national cemeteries to be removed. The House is also doing a number of minor bills while waiting for larger bills to be completed.
So we give you thanks for giving us another day. We join the world this day to ask your blessing upon all worldwide who mourn the death of Nelson Mandela. One of the great figures of human history and most certainly of our own era, Madiba joined a small fellowship of heroic people whose commitment ultimately to nonviolence and reconciliation changed our world. As today marks the 20th anniversary of the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, we ask that you give all who inhabit the earth the will to intensify our efforts to fulfill our collective responsibility to promote and protect the rights and dignity of all people everywhere, and the wisdom to know how best to do so. Bless us this day and every day, and may all that is done within the people's house be for your greater honor and glory. Amen.
The Chair has examined the journal of the last day's proceedings and announces to the House his approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the journal stands approved. The Pledge of Allegiance will be led by the gentlewoman from Arizona, Ms. Kirkpatrick.
Will members and guests in the gallery please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which we stand, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The Chair will entertain requests for 15 one-minute speeches on each side of the aisle. For what purpose does the gentlewoman from North Carolina rise?
I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Even the White House's best Obamacare damage control efforts, waivers, delays, penalty deadline adjustments, and temporary fixes sadly leave the so-called Affordable Care Act's sand foundation untouched. Math undergirding the entire law remains structurally unsound and threatens the broader insurance market in this country. That is a shame for each and every American. As someone who wants to see greater access and affordability in health care and more options for Americans in the individual insurance market, it's my hope that the country moves toward a competitive, patient-centered system like the one outlined by the House Republican Study Committee in the American Health Care Reform Act. Something as important as transformative as health care policy should never be forced on the American people on an embarrassingly unstudied and purely partisan basis, the way President Obama chose to proceed with the Affordable Care Act. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. What purpose does the gentlewoman from Arizona rise?
I request unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to revise and extend my remarks.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 1 minute.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in favor of H.R. 3521, which authorizes medical facility leases for the Department of Veterans Affairs. I am a co-sponsor of this bipartisan bill, and I'm pleased that it allocates $20 million for community-based outpatient clinics in my home state of Arizona. The Phoenix VA healthcare system serves the majority of our veterans. More than 300,000 veterans reside in this service area. Having an additional facility will help these men and women access the care they deserve. I thank my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for supporting this bill. Helping our veterans isn't a partisan issue, it's a national responsibility, and I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlewoman yields back. Chair lays before the House a communication.
The Honorable, the Speaker, House of Representatives, sir. Pursuant to the permission granted in Clause 2H of Rule 2 of the Rules of the U.S. House of Representatives, the clerk received the following message from the Secretary of the Senate on December 9, 2013 at 6:06 p.m. that the Senate passed without amendment H.R. 3626, Signed sincerely, Karen L. Haas.
Pursuant to Clause 4 of Rule 1, the following enrolled bill was signed by the Speaker Pro Tem Denham on Monday, December 9, 2013.
H.R. 3626, a bill to extend the Undetectable Firearms Act of 1988 for 10 years.
Good call. Clause 8 of Rule 20, the Chair will postpone further proceedings today on motions to suspend the rules on which a recorded vote or the yeas and nays are ordered, or on which the vote occurs objection under Clause 6 of Rule 20. Record votes on postponed questions will be taken later. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 3521, the Department of Veterans Affairs Major Medical Facility Lease Authorization Act of 2013 with an amendment.
The clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 3521, a bill to authorize Department of Veterans Affairs major medical facility leases and for other purposes.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Miller, and the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Michoud, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent that all members would have 5 legislative days with which to revise and extend their remarks on H.R. 3521 as amended.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. H.R. 3521 is the Department of Veterans Affairs Major Medical Facility Lease Authorization Act of 2013. As amended, it will authorize 27 major medical facility leases as requested by the VA in the fiscal year of 2013 and 2014 budget submissions. I would also make a number of congressional findings and establish certain requirements for the budgetary treatment of such leases to ensure that the legislation itself meets both the spirit and the intent of the House Cutco rule. As we all know, when the committee was considering legislation to authorize VA's major medical facility leases last year, the Congressional Budget Office raised concerns about how to properly account for VA's lease authorizations. In response to CBO's concerns, Section 3 of the bill would require the VA to record an obligation at the time a contract is signed in an amount equal to either the total payment that would be made under its full term or an amount equal to the sum of the first annual lease payment and any specified cancellation costs. For the last year, I've remained committed to working closely with VA, CBO, and our colleagues from both sides of the aisle and both sides of the Capitol to find a way forward for VA's major medical facility lease program on behalf of the veterans of this country, especially those in the 27 communities that will be impacted by the leases included in this piece of legislation. To that end, I'm grateful for the hard work and the leadership of our ranking member, Mike Michaud of Maine, and the other committee members in advancing this piece of legislation to the floor. At this time, I urge all my colleagues to join me in supporting H.R. 3521 as amended, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 3521, the Department of Veterans Affairs Major Medical Facility Lease Authorization Act of 2013. Mr. Speaker, this bill would authorize a number of major medical facility leases that will ensure veterans continue to receive care in safe, efficient, and modern clinics closer to home. Last year, much to our disappointment, we were unable to pass a lease authorization bill. As a result of H.R. 3521, contains leases requests for fiscal year 2013 and 2014. 27 leases were included in this bill. From New Jersey to Hawaii, veterans can expect long-awaited expansions to cramped community-based outpatient clinics, new clinical research space, and sorely needed replacement facilities. This bill is a bipartisan bill and in the best interest of America's veterans. I appreciate the efforts of my colleagues across the aisle, especially Chairman Miller, for the collaborative effort that permitted this important legislation to move forward. Mr. Speaker, I know you will agree with me that it is our obligation to ensure that our veterans are provided the best care possible in a timely and safe manner. I believe H.R. 3521 as amended will just do that. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to yield at this time the Vice Chairman of the full Committee on Veterans Affairs, somebody that has been a very staunch supporter of veterans issues since the day he became a member of this Congress. I yield 2 minutes to Mr. Bilirakis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 3521, and I urge all my colleagues to support this important piece of legislation that will allow the VA to move forward with these 27 leases in order to better serve the veterans, our true American heroes across the country. The veterans in and around the Tampa Bay area will be particularly served by this legislation. The VA recently approved a plan that would take the currently strained 5 existing clinics that are spread out over a large area and consolidate them into a convenient one-stop facility. This would allow the VA to better meet the growing needs of the veterans community with its diverse health status. However, because of the technical issues we are solving today, this project had not been able to move forward. By passing this bill, the House will allow for not only the consolidation of our 5 medical clinics in my congressional district into one property, but for 26 other equally important projects to move forward across the country, improving access for our heroes. This would not have been done, Mr. Speaker, without our great chairman here, Mr. Miller, and our ranking member, Mr. Michaud. So thank you so very much. And I know that our true American heroes, our veterans, appreciate it very much, and I urge passage of this bill. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Florida reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Maine.
Any more speakers? Mr. Speaker, I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Maine reserves the balance of his time. Gentleman from Florida.
To the gentleman from Maine, we do have one more speaker, and he has been an advocate for this issue for quite some time, Mr. Boustany from Louisiana, who has two of these facilities in his district. I recognize him for 2 minutes, Mr. Boustany from the state of Louisiana.
Gentleman's recognized for 2 minutes.
I thank the chairman, and Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of H.R. 3521. And I want to applaud Chairman Jeff Miller and the chairman of the Budget Committee, Paul Ryan, and their respective staff on the House Veterans Affairs Committee and Budget Committees for advancing this important bill and improving veterans' access to medical care. I also appreciate the work that the two senators from my home state, Senators Landrieu and Vitter, have been doing, and they pledged their progress in the Senate. And so we'll hope to get this done before the end of the year. Last year, more than 66 members of Congress signed our bipartisan bicameral letter calling for progress on 27 major medical facility leases proposed by the Department of Veterans Affairs during the past 2 years. Among these leases are 2 clinics promised by VA Secretary Eric Shinseki, and these clinics were promised in Lake Charles and Lafayette in my congressional district. Without congressional authorization of these clinics, more than 3,000 South Louisiana veterans must travel in excess of 3 hours to receive medical care. A recent CBS Evening News story featured one of these wounded warriors in South Louisiana who goes without care because his family must miss work to drive him 3 hours. It's just unacceptable. The American people expect Congress to demonstrate that it can govern effectively in a bipartisan manner, and this is one way we can do it, by keeping our promise to our veterans. The passage of this bill will improve medical access for more than 340,000 veterans in 22 states, and that's why I urge our House and Senate colleagues to send this bill to the President before the end of the year. Again, I thank Chairman Miller for his fine work on this in the committee, for giving me the opportunity to speak, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Florida.
We're finished with our speakers at this time. I reserve and allow Mr. Michaud to close.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Maine is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I'd urge my colleagues to support H.R. 3521 as amended, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I encourage all members to support this piece of legislation, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Bill H.R. 3521 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, 2/3 being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. The bill is passed.
Speaker,
gentleman from Florida.
I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Florida seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, I move to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1402 as amended.
Clerk will report the title of the bill.
H.R. 1402, a bill to amend Title 38 United States Code to extend the authorization of appropriations for the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to pay a monthly assistance allowance to disabled veterans training or competing for the Paralympic team, and the authorization of appropriations for the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to provide assistance to the United States Paralympics Incorporated.
Pursuant to the rule, the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Miller, and the gentleman from Maine, Mr. Michaud, each will control 20 minutes. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Once again, I ask unanimous consent that all members would have 5 legislative days with which to revise and extend their remarks and add any extraneous material they may have on H.R. 1402 as amended.
Without objection, so ordered.
And, Mr. Speaker, I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you very much, and I rise today in support of H.R. 1402 as amended, the VA Expiring Authorities Act of 2013. Speaker, to put it simply, this bill extends the legal authorization for several of VA's authorities. Without enactment of this bill before the 31st of December of 2013, the authorization to run certain programs and to exercise certain legal authorities would end. This could be very detrimental to veterans and their families. For example, the bill extends VA's authority to ensure that severely disabled veterans have priority access to nursing home care, to include those who require that level of care for service-connected disabilities. It also extends VA's adaptive sports program that is currently run through a partnership with the U.S. Paralympic Committee. Mr. Speaker, I've met with veterans who have benefited from this partnership and have seen firsthand the positive impact that the activities and events have had on both them and their families. H.R. 1402, as amended, would extend other legal authorities to help veterans, including the authorization for treatment and rehabilitative services for homeless and seriously mental ill veterans, housing assistance for homeless veterans, authorization to permit the use of contract exam providers for disability claims, and several other important extensions. I'm pleased also to report that funding for these extensions was included in both the President's budget request and appropriation bills passed by the House and is pending in the Senate. I thank my good friend again and ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Michaud, for his assistance in bringing this piece of legislation to the floor, and I again want to thank all my colleagues in the Senate for reaching an agreement with us on this language, especially the Senate VA Chairman, Mr. Sanders, and the ranking member, Mr. Burr of North Carolina. Once again, I want to encourage all members to support the bill, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield myself such time as I may consume.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in full support of H.R. 1402 as amended, the VA Expiring Authorities Extension Act of 2013. Mr. Speaker, this bill as amended would extend a number of critical programs administered by the VA. It is a bipartisan measure, and I appreciate the highly collaborative effort of the committee staffs and the cooperative effort of our colleagues on the other side of this chamber. H.R. 1402 as amended would extend the authorization of appropriations for the VA to provide monthly stipends to athletes competing in large-scale adaptive sports programs, and extend the authority of the VA to provide grants to entities that plan and carry out adaptive sports programs. This bill represents a bipartisan and bicameral agreement to modify the existing program and to provide more stringent oversight of the program. H.R. 1402 as amended would also extend to the end of the next year the authority of the VA to transport certain individuals to and from VA facilities, to operate the regional office in the Philippines, and to contract with non-VA physicians to conduct medical disability examinations. H.R. 1402 as amended would also extend the requirement that VA provide nursing home care to certain veterans, extend the authority to provide treatment and rehabilitation services for seriously mentally ill and homeless veterans, and extend the authority of the VA to provide housing assistance for homeless veterans. Finally, this bill would extend the authority of two advisory committees, the Advisory Committee on Homeless Veterans and the Advisory Committee on Education, as well as extend the authority for requirements relating to the sale of Vendine loans by the VA. Mr. Speaker, we have passed many veterans' bills out of the House this year. It is my hope that some of these bills will become law before the year is out. I look forward to working with our colleagues in the Senate and make sure that we get this bill passed. The job at hand today is to pass this extenders bill, send it over to the Senate for a quick consideration, and to get it to the President's desk before the end of the year, before the authority to continue these vital programs lapse. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the things that's necessary in order to bring a piece of legislation that has this many moving parts is somebody who has been involved very much in each of those pieces of legislation. I want to recognize for as much time as he may want to consume the chairman of the Oversight and Investigative Subcommittee, the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman.
Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this year, I introduced, along with Representative Mark Tancano, House Resolution 1402, the Veteran Paralympics Act, and I am happy to see that this legislation is now poised to pass the House floor along with other important programs for veterans. My portion of this legislation will extend this joint program operated by the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Olympic Committee that funds grants to adaptive sports programs for disabled veterans all across our country. Paralympic programs are adaptive sports for physically disabled athletes, and research has shown that Paralympic sports and other forms of physical activity are an impactful aspect of the successful rehabilitation for these wounded warriors. The Veterans Paralympics Act will ensure that disabled veterans in local communities throughout our country will continue to have opportunities for rehabilitation, stress relief, and higher achievement through adaptive sports. Currently, there are dozens of partnership organizations in Colorado and over 300 nationwide that are helping our veterans with their rehabilitation through adaptive sports. During committee hearings, I discussed the Veterans Paralympic Act with Charlie Hubner, the U.S. Olympic Committee's Paralympic chief. He stated that this extension would help more than 16,000 disabled veterans in communities throughout America receive adaptive sports rehabilitation. Mr. Hubner and I both emphatically agree that participation in adaptive sports and other athletic activities can help speed the rehabilitation process for disabled veterans. And this legislation, if passed, will ensure rehabilitative opportunities for disabled veterans in local communities throughout the country. I am proud to lead this effort to extend and support this important program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield back the balance of my time. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Florida reserves. Gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from California, Mr. Decano.
Gentleman is recognized for 3 minutes.
I thank the gentleman from Maine, the ranking member, for yielding time. Mr. Speaker, I rise today to support the Veterans Paralympic Act, a bipartisan piece of legislation that would extend the funding for adaptive sport programs for disabled veterans. Through the Department of Veterans Affairs and the U.S. Olympic Committee, this joint program has provided sports and other athletic activities that help speed up the rehabilitation process for our nation's heroes. By extending the funding through 2018 and improving access to adaptive sports programs, this legislation would provide the greatest opportunity for rehabilitation through sports our veterans have ever had. The sacrifice of these heroes is immeasurable, and I believe that Congress should be doing all it can to help their rehabilitation process. I thank the representative from Colorado, Mr. Kaufman, for introducing this bill, and I look forward to its passage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Negerti McLeod.
Gentlewoman is recognized for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of H.R. 1402 that extends VA housing programs for homeless veterans. The California District, which I represent, is home to over 20,000 veterans. Like the nation, homelessness among veterans is a serious problem in my district. It will take continued coordination between VA and local organizations to ensure that veterans are able to take advantage of housing assistance programs. As a member of the House VA Subcommittee on Health, in August of this year I hosted a town hall with the VA and local organizations. Over 200 veterans attended and signed up for VA veterans benefits for the very first time. This is a great example of better coordination in helping our veterans. Thank you so much, and I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. Gentleman from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to once again thank Chairman Miller for his collaborative effort in bringing both these bills before the House today, and his continued support to make sure we do everything that we can to pass legislation that will help our veterans. I also want to thank the staff on both the majority and the minority side for working so well together to get these bills before the floor. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I would urge my colleagues to support H.R. 1502 as amended, and I yield back to balance my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I, too, urge my colleagues to support H.R. 1402 as amended and yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The question is, will the House suspend the rules and pass Bill H.R. 1402 as amended? Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the Chair, two-thirds being in the affirmative, the rules are suspended. Gentleman from Florida.
On that, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. All those in favor of taking this vote by the yeas and nays will rise and remain standing until counted. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess until approximately 4 p.m. today.
When members return at 4 Eastern, they'll vote on bills debated today. The House doing a number of minor bills while waiting for negotiations to be completed on the federal budget, the Farm Bill, and other issues that need to be resolved before the end of the year. President Obama praised Nelson Mandela this morning as the last great liberator of the 20th century, urging the